September 10th at the T-Mobile Arena, main event, 5 rounds. Now, if it's been verbally agreed, nothing's been signed, but I got some additional details I'll share in just a minute. BC, there is a lot to unpack here. When you think about what first occurred to you when you heard this news?
That Nate Diaz, excuse me, Diaz Army.
That the lower third spelled Chimaev wrong?
Yeah, well, that's part of it. Me interrupting you in a key moment, another part of it. But here's the deal: Nate Diaz is that dude, and we already knew that this fight had been talked about when Nate was really pushing to get out of his deal. He'd accepted it, and then he felt like Chimaev was going in the other direction. But with all the bad PR and headlines going around about Nate's handling, UFC still unwilling to let him exit through the meat grinder on his way out, Luke. And what balls this man has to take this fight. You can say he has no other choice. He sat out for a year and a half. He wants to make big-time money, and whether it's Jake Paul or not on the outside, and we all believe he should and should have already been there. But this is as hard and look, we saw PVZ against Amanda Hebos. That was a harsh goodbye. This is another category of that. The opening odds are minus 1,100. Can we start right there, Luke? Is that realistic? Is that that's some Shevchenko, Nico Montano type numbers? I mean, this is as fuck off on your way off as the UFC can possibly get. It's also, by the way, a fight that's going to, rightfully so, draw huge eyeballs. This is going to be an event, but it's as weird an event, given the circumstances, as I've ever imagined.
So I'm a little bit torn on this one, which is to say I agree with just about everything you said, but I had a couple of conversations yesterday with some folks close to Nate Diaz, very close. And the one kind of unifying theme, this is not news, but they were driving it home with me, which was after the Chimaev-Burns fight, Nate has been asking apparently for this Chimaev fight repeatedly since then. In fact, they didn't even like the idea that this was characterized as what Nate was offered. What they wanted the world to know, I suppose, was that Nate had actually repeatedly requested it, because if you go on social media and you look at the way in which this is being viewed, everyone is like, oh my God, poor Nate, UFC is doing him dirty on the way out. And I can understand that impression, because this fight doesn't make sense, right? If Dana White is saying things like Nate is 1-4 in his last 5, and who has he beaten, and this, that, and the other, and then you're giving him the number 2 or whatever Chimaev is ranked at 2 or 3, number 2 ranked guy in the world. Well, which is it? Is Nate deserving of the number 2 guy in the world, or is he a guy who's 1-4 in his last 5 on the way out the door? You kind of decide, and this is why this fight is nonsensical. Although, also to the point you raised about the odds for a male fight, because we've seen crazy female odds for a male fight. I don't know if I've ever seen odds this lopsided in UFC ever. I can't say that declaratively. I don't know if that's 100% true, but I don't know if I've ever seen a disparity like this on the male side of the game. It's fairly unheard of.
Well, certainly not with names. I don't think you've ever seen something with names.
Like
names
a headlining bout. Like a headlining bout, yeah.
I mean...
But BC, let me just pitch it back to you, because this is the thing I've been going over. I don't understand. I'm going to assume that what I was told about Nate is true. And again, the people who told me have they know. Okay, they know. Why on earth would Nate ask for this? And I'm trying to think of what the reason could be. And some folks said, well, it's a no lose, because if you win, of course you take the thunder from the UFC's basically enforcer at this point. And that would be amazing on your way out the door. And then if you lose, well, no harm, no foul. You weren't expected to win. But BC, you and I know the truth, dude. You could get your ass.
Yeah, there's harm. You said here. No harm, no foul. Dude,
so why would Nate be so adamant about this fight?
I'll get to that in a second, but there is harm foul. You get one-sidedly demolished, your value does go down. That's the truth, right? But here's why. So I started off by saying, look, just by saying yes to this in any form, as Cheech and Chong once famously said, what balls he has. I mean, this is we got to shout out Nate Diaz. I know I get down on him when he does the Nate Diaz talk of, I never lost, and, submissions don't count. All that stuff, whatever, the stuff that he said. Submissions don't count is more of a McGregor line, but you get what I'm saying. The whole, I'm undefeated, that whole mindset of when, no, you've taken clear losses before. But this is what this motherfucker's all about. F you. Oh, this is your monster? okay, and this is my only way to get out of this company and go be free, then I'm going to do it. But the thing that you specifically asked, what gives him this confidence? Why would he run in this direction? I think it's because of the Gilbert Burns fight with Chimaev, which showed, of course, how much of an absolute savage Chimaev is when you go 50-50 and brawl in the center of cage with him. But if you're Nate Diaz, who just fought somebody, albeit a year plus ago, who was way more technically ahead of him, mixed with the youth, mixed with everything, and that's the guy who's going to be fighting Usman coming up, Edwards, for the welterweight title, and Nate in a 5-round fight, took the early damage, then hung around and did Nate Diaz things and almost pulled an upset. He just got to see an example of how you get close to hitting that spot in the middle of the Death Star, which is Chimaev, to get it to blow up. Maybe in hindsight, Chimaev was too willing to be in an action fight in there, or maybe Gilbert Burns pulled it out of him just by standing in and not going anywhere. But I think if you're Nate Diaz and you're that old school OG, and the one skill I got left is I can get in these fights, and I got the stamina to be in these crazy fights late, and I can outlast the dude next to me. I think he saw proof in that Gilbert Burns fight that Chimaev is human, and that's all Nate Diaz needs. That's part of the percentage. Part of it is, this is the only way I get to go. This is the only door they're opening for me. So I'm such a badass that I'm going to kick it open and I don't care what happens. But I think part of it, Luke, is he sees the way he's going to survive this and either win or, lose with his head held high if he has to. And dude, that's ballsy. This is a real man right here, Luke.
Well, there should be no denying who Nate Diaz is in terms of character. And I made this point on Twitter yesterday, but I'll briefly reiterate it. Folks won't remember this name, and this guy got into trouble with the law later, but for what he represented as a fighter at the time, in Nate Diaz's 7th pro fight, he fought Hermes Franca, which was like an absurdly difficult assignment for that level of his development, and he still did it anyway. He took on Conor McGregor on, 10 days notice. He fought Rafael dos Anjos badly injured. One more reminder, the Diaz boys have never withdrawn from a fight due to injury. I want you to think about that, because Nate Diaz is coming up on, I think, 15 years inside the Ultimate Fighting Championship. Yes, with some significant time off, but 15 years he has never withdrawn from a bout due to injury. The guy is only accustomed to tough assignments and across weight classes that he probably shouldn't have been in, like 170, which, by the way, there's another part to this. It's like Chimaev is a beast at 185. At 170, he's a fucking animal. Like, this is just a really tough assignment. But to your point, the guy's got character for days. I think the thing that I really go back to on this one is, man, all that stuff when Nate's like, I've never lost, and this kind of thing, and I beat Khabib because it was a street fight. I always took that as Nate kind of being wink, wink, nudge, nudge. I know that's not true, but it's a great way to self-promote. Now I'm kind of wondering, like, I get your point that Khamzat fought undisciplined against Burns. But, dude, I think Burns probably hits a lot harder than Nate Diaz at 170.
Oh,
you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, for all the flaws that he showed in that fight and for all the undisciplined ways in which he fought a guy, yes, Gilbert Burns fought at 155 and 170, but I would call him a much more natural 170er. I got to tell you, like, again, it's not just loss he's risking here. This fight, it's a 5 rounds. He could take a career-altering beating here. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility. Do you?
No, and that's the scary part of it. But in that, matches what you said earlier about, like, this is on brand. This is what the hell this guy does. He's always done that. So it's not that different to him. But I don't ever remember something this weird. Again, the situation with the contract, the time between, the fact that we had such long public soap operas about who was at fault and why this happened, and yet they just settle on, all right, F it, we'll do the Chimaev fight. Okay, you know what I'm saying? So, Luke, I got to bring up the other part of the Diaz brother, experience. And granted, this other part of it tends to circle around Nick in totality in recent years more than Nate, which is the bizarre sort of antics inside the cage, although that's not completely out of bounds for Nate to do something wacky. But, a lot of people are going, okay, this is so WWE right now to begin with. Dana's basically Vince McMahon. Nate is Bret Hart, Montreal Screwjob. I've gotten a lot of DMs from fans going, BC, your old school wrestling heart must be loving this. So in that sort of pro wrestling veil of looking at it, Luke, a lot of people are going, okay, the ultimate Nate Diaz move here, or Diaz brother move, would be to walk in, flip off Dana White cage side, lay down and get tapped out right there and be like, fuck off, UFC. Now, Luke, I don't think he'll do that. That's also like, couldn't they take him to court for that? I mean, they could withhold his purse. There's a lot of other sides to that, Luke, that also just says F you to the game. But there's a softer version of that. Do you remember when Nick Diaz fought Anderson Silva and just kind of did Nick Diaz stuff and laid down and kind of engaged, but mostly didn't? Is there a scenario in which this could turn into that type of fight? If it's not Nate Diaz flipping the bird and taking a fall and doing breaking kayfabe, is there a scenario where he goes in there and then just goes, F you guys, I'll coast to a decision loss? Or is this not the opponent to even attempt that with?
I don't. I've seen some folks be like, is he going to go do the Bob Sapp where the bell rings and he immediately taps the ground? I don't foresee that. I really don't take that seriously. I suppose anything could happen, but I wouldn't expect that. Or who was the boxer? I forget who it was, where they brought him out to the ring, they announced him, and then as soon as the bell rings, he just walked out right in the middle.
Yeah, it was the guy fighting F.A. Ajagba.
Yes. So I don't foresee that. I foresee this basically either Nate surprises, I think, a lot of people, myself and probably you included, and submits him or knocks him out or something, which is not out of the realm of possibility, but unlikely, I think is a very charitable way to put it. Or he just takes a fucking beating, man. I'm really kind of worried about it, dude. Nate Diaz is 37 years old, man. How many big fights do you think he honestly has left? Like, let's talk about that for a second. How many big fights does he really have left? This one? Probably after this one, if he can get it, if the stars align or whatever. It seems like the Jake Paul fight is there. Potentially 2 of those. Now, that he's at 37 now. He might be like 38, 39 by that point. There's not a lot of time left for big fights. True or false?
I mean, he's going to get Conor again, whether it's at the Lava Shack or in BKFC. Like, they'll fight a third time, but I hear your point. This is this brings the potential given. Okay, so if the pro wrestling FU is out the window, and I agree with you. I don't think he's going to be that recklessly unprofessional, although a lot of people would say, justified and all that because of how he was treated. You can argue that as well. But it's more likely, Luke, given his character, that he's going to go in there and just fight, like you said. I mean, look, the odds should be wide. This is, a weird fight. The reality is Nate should be in the senior division fighting other old faded names, and they should celebrate him on the way out, but they don't do that. I get that, but that's what it should be. Is there a scenario, Luke, where he can lose but not F around, but also not get physically dominated? Because look, I'm going to be honest. I didn't think that last round rally against Edwards was like possible in that scenario. I thought he was going to lose a one-sided fight in which he may be on the verge of getting stopped due to cuts and damage. And although he took, damage in that fight, he hung around and then he was fresh as shit in the final round. If he pours out what's left to avoid getting dominated, and let me put that in the right frame of mind. Whether you think Izzy may have taken his foot off the gas against Anderson Silva in that last-minute sort of special fight they created, or you believe, like I do, that Silva just poured out whatever was left to avoid getting handled and to keep himself kind of in that fight. Is there enough legend left in Nate to pour that out and use every ounce of what he has to avoid getting beat up, Luke? Or is it just different against a guy like this? I know I'm kind of asking the same question twice, but I don't want to underestimate.
Is there a scenario where Nate loses, but handles himself well enough where he doesn't get exceptionally beat up or something like that? Yeah, it's possible. But dude, let's just talk about the realistic one here. The realistic one. You're talking about a guy, Nate Diaz was a 155er who's now at 170. Chimaev is a guy who's probably better at 170, but can fight quite ably at 185. And he has, modern control, significantly better wrestling, better athleticism, a certain kind of physical intensity and drive. He probably has pretty good submission defense as well. The likeliest outcome here is that he puts a fucking beating on Nate Diaz, and a bad one at that. That's the likeliest outcome. What will happen, your guess is as good as mine. But I'm on it. I'm saying this, I want to be very clear about this. I'm actually a little bit worried about it. I'm a little bit worried about how ugly this could potentially get. Now, if Nate goes in there and subs him, dude, that would be one of the most legendary fucking performances in UFC history, to be quite honest with you. That's really what it would be. It would be historic for him to stick it to them in that way. But the likelihood of that is not high. The likelihood of that is very, very low. And that's what gives me some concern.
All
Let
right,
me ask you this. Go ahead.
Okay, you asked me a question. Let's do it. All right.
Well, here's the thing. 15 years later, it's ending like this. And to me, if it ends like this 15 years later, it probably should have ended a lot sooner, where both parties basically can't stand the other one, and Nate's got whatever his designs are, and UFC's got whatever their designs are, and now they're just having this ugly departure, which God only knows what path it will take, but probably not a pretty one, whichever path it is. I have to say, like, this should be like a wake-up call for a lot of the fighters. Listen, there are guys who have a relationship with UFC, and then when they're done, they continue to have one. Your Liddells, your Forrest Griffins in particular, your Matt Hugheses. Those things are real and they matter. But like throughout UFC history, Nate Diaz is not new in the sense that there are the Frank Shamrocks and the Tim Sylvias, and you could point to all of the ones. Look at Anderson Silva, one of the maybe the best fighter ever. Look at the departure he had. They were a little bit kinder to him, obviously, on the way out the door, but they didn't really roll out the red carpet for him. There wasn't that kind of a thing. This kind of acrimony, I wonder what lesson you take from this, BC. I wonder after 15 years of the Nate Diaz experience, why it's ending with a bang potentially, but so poorly in terms of the relationship between the fighter and the promoter. What do you infer from that?
Well, it's like even, I always talk about the have and have-nots in the fighter pay discussion, and the 1%, once they reach that 1%, they have no motivation left to ruin it for themselves, and they just want to live in that 1% and take the money they can get behind the scenes and all that. So we always look at it as, okay, if you can sell, that covers up sins. Why were we saying Yair should jump Josh Emmett in the title? Because you can sell. It's a different type of marketing claim. This is a situation where somebody can sell, and yet, again, they still missed 3 consecutive years after their commercial prime, after beating Conor and fighting Conor in an amazing 2-fight series. He just went away. So I think what this does show you is even if you can sell, and there's times where the company can work with you on almost an even level in terms of helping you and helping them, you're still not, in the family. But that doesn't really prove that point. You can still be kicked out of the family. You're still, it's still not a blood pact. But like, the Diaz's have never really been UFC family. So in this regard, Luke, you can't learn you can learn just in the idea of things that you should already be learning by reading the headlines, which is, Dana White giving that big ass bag to the Nelk boys and basically saying F you fighters. And then, the next day, the whole insight on that whole court filing and, or not court filing, but, the boosters and the money being raised to sort of legally with the to fight against the potential of unionization and fighter rights. So you should already learned all this if you were a fighter. But at the same time, Luke, the Nate's situation is just so unique to begin with. I mean, like, his communication with the company at certain times in the last 5 years just completely fell apart. Like, completely. Like, nobody talking to each other. So it's hard because it's been, in the Diaz's DNA to be lone wolves and sort of these guys that just do things their own way, and credit to both brothers, they have. But I can't, there's no comparison unless you go to Bret Hart versus freaking Shawn Michaels in the Survivor Series that time or whatever in Montreal. Like, and there's no comparison in modern combat sports where I can remember something like this being like this. The fear we have mixed with how Nate's been handled. So yeah, what should other fighters learn? Like, you got to be fighting for yourself, man. You know what I mean? Like, I'm glad that Nate, to some degree at least, is wanting this and welcoming this, because when Nick came back and last fought, we heard the post-fight interview. It sounded sad, like he didn't want to be there. This is the opposite of that. But this is such a fuck you from the UFC that it's just ridiculous, Luke. And it gives a crazy opportunity for Nate, who's already been getting that hero love the past, year and a half in his return coming back against Edwards, and I love seeing that. How do you think Nate should handle this, the build to this fight? Because, Luke, you don't get down on this pro wrestling shit. Nate's not a huge trash talker unless you provoke him, but how do you think he will go out PR-wise, and do you think he should kind of be burning the ship down with him as he's getting off of it?
Well, like I said, if the last chapter ends up being, however unlikely I may view it, if it ends up being that he submits or knocks out Chimaev, I mean, that would be, I mean, you want to talk about the legend of Nate Diaz. I don't know what on earth would be, like, to make the fan base love you. That would be probably top of the list. I cannot think of anything bigger than that.